Hello. So, right out of the gate, I need to mention that recoloring VFX can be a very long, a very tedious, and sometimes very frustrating process. And that is because there are a lot of different things that go into determining the color of a VFX, and they can interact in a bunch of different ways. And sometimes it may seem like they make no sense, and it can be hard to get a certain particle the color that you want, or you may think, you've set all the settings and you think a particle should be blue, but part of it is yellow and you can't figure out why. It takes a lot of trial and error and playing with settings, fiddling around until you find the thing that fixes it. And I'm gonna try and go over as many different cases as I can and possible problems you run into. But that said, I'm also going to be using a spell that I don't know every single particle of and exactly how to manipulate it. And I'm going to do that on purpose because I want you to see in like an organic way how this process works, how you go about figuring out which thing controls the particle in a certain manner. And I just have to warn you of that from the beginning. However, recoloring VFX can also be extremely, extremely rewarding, and it can make it feel like you're playing an entirely new class. For example, I am working on redoing my bard, and I am changing it to feel more like a archer or a ranger. So I'm getting rid of all the musical effects and all the sort of prismatic particles and changing them to a green with some nature effects to them, as well as a little bit of fire on some of the AoEs to bring back the feeling of like flaming arrow. And it's looking fantastic, and I'm really, really happy with the progress. And again, it feels like I'm playing a whole new class. It doesn't feel like a bard anymore, and it's great. So I don't want to discourage anyone by, telling you that this can be really difficult and really annoying. But I just want you to know, I have to be straight from the process or from the beginning that this process can be a bit of work. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and actually get started. And the first thing is please, please, please make a save file when you do this. So just go to File, Save As, name it whatever you want, and save often. Because again, this can be a lot of work. You never know what's going to happen. You might also have to stop for a while and come back, and you do not want to lose any of that progress. It's going to make you want to cry. And on top of that, there is a bug that is guaranteed to cause you to crash. And I will go over that when we get to it. Ocelot is aware of it. It has to do with converting the textures from the game into the plugin. But again, I'll go into more detail from that. But that is just to say, please save often. Okay. So what goes into making a VFX easy to recolor versus difficult? Well, it has to do with the number of VFX within a given skill, and then within that, how many particles are within each VFX. So an example of a very easy one would be Fast Blade. So if I click this top magnifying glass, go to Action, And I'm going to type in fast, and I will select fast blade. You can see that other than the common, I only have one VFX. And I personally recommend leaving the commons alone. However, you are welcome to recolor them if you want. Just know that if you recolor multiple, you are going to have priority issues within Penumbra. So just be aware of that. And if you're okay with reorganizing those priorities, go ahead, change things to your heart's content. This is just my preference. I leave them alone. So I'm going to select VFX1 here, and then I will do the same for the bottom. I will click the bottom magnifying glass, action, fast blade, and VFX1. Now I can close these down. So we only had one VFX to edit. That's great. But beyond that, if we look at the particles here, we only have 4 particles. That's nothing. It's a walk in the park, recoloring this spell. And I'm not going to do every single particle, but this really is the core of how you are going to be recoloring your VFX. Is you are going to go particle by particle and change their colors to be what you want them to be. So just to demonstrate here, I am going to click particle 2, and I want to be on this animation tab, and I'm going to go down to color, and here we go. This is what I want to recolor. So what I want to do is I want to make this one red. So I'm going to click this white area, and then I will click the little box and change that to red like so. Now, if I hit update, actually, I'm going to change these parameters here, and I'm going to make this quite large so we can see the changes more easily. We'll hit update. Now, if I spawn this on the target, let's try update again. There we go. Now we have some nice large red slashes going on. And now I just sort of repeat the process. I'm going to go down to the next particle, and I'm going to change the color. This time I want the color to be blue. So I'm going to click this first one, and we will go to blue like this. And now I want to let you in on kind of a cool trick that you can do to help speed up the process of recoloring these. Whatever field here that you have sort of selected that is, being edited, whether it's, one of the colors or the hue or the entire color itself, if your cursor is in there blinking like that and you click another node, it's going to copy it exactly over. So that can save you a lot of time if you want things blanket to be one color. But what I personally like to do is, instead of copying the entire hex value or using that, what I like to do is I like to use the hue. So I will find a color that I like, and let's say that it is this bright, royal blue. I'm going to click the hue, and then I will click the next node. And you can see here that it keeps the color in the same range. Oops, I didn't click there. It keeps the color within the same range, but it also preserves the sort of shape to the gradient that was already set up by the game. And I'm not going to do the exact same hue, maybe for every single VFX, but I will do it, sometimes for every single particle within a given VFX. That way, a certain spell is blue, and then another certain spell is green. But they still, it's not like they're just a solid color. They still follow the, you know, the intensities that are preset by the developers already. So just for demonstration purposes, though, we will change this back up to a very deep blue or bright blue, and then I will copy that over like that. And so now if I go to update and spawn on target, there we go. We have some nice blue slashes along with our red ones. So that really is the core of what you're going to be doing to recolor your VFX. Is just go one by one and change them as you see fit. With that said, there are two ways to go about making more, you know, broad sweeping changes, and I will go over those in just a second here. But as I mentioned, this is a very, very easy case in terms of recoloring VFX. So in contrast, let's go ahead and load in Blade of Valor. So I will type Valor, and I will select that, and I'm going to use VFX2. And then again, the bottom, we'll say Valor, and I will select VFX2 like so. So now let's spawn this on the target just so you can get a look at its default. There we go. So that's Blade of Valor. If I want to make this entire thing a certain color, I can do that. And the way that's done is by going over to this Parameters tab and then down to this Revised Color line. And these three boxes are RGB values. If you're familiar with RGB from other systems, one is like 255. It's essentially the max. And then, of course, 0 is 0. So if I have, you know, a red of 1 and then both my green and my blue are 0, the spell is going to be very, very red. And I can do that. So let's just demonstrate here. I'll leave red at 1, and then I will do, let's say, 0.5 on the green and the blue, like this. And now if I update and I spawn this on the target, you can see we have a largely red effect. However, you can also see there's still some other color bleeding through. Like there's some blue going on and a little bit of yellow. And we will get into why that is in a little bit. But if you want to make broad sweeping changes, you know, I can even make these 0 to make this more obvious. There we go. See, now most of it is very yellow. That's the way to do it if you want just quickly to recolor a skill. You know, maybe like with Fast Blade, something that has very, very few particles, and you know you just want it to be a certain color, then you don't have to go through and edit all, you know, all or every particle. You can just come in and see here and say, I want blue Fast Blade, and just change it really quick. However, with the case of Blade of Valor, that's definitely not what I want. It's a lot more complex, and I want it to stay that way. So I'm going to reset these to 1 here real quick, just so I can move on without it being blanketed as a certain color. The next sort of step, or in this case, sort of a step down in making broad changes to colors, is by manipulating the emitters. And emitters control multiple particles at once. So this lets you change sort of chunks of a spell at a time. So if I click on emitter and I say like emitter 0, you can see it controls particles 0 through 4. And then if I click on emitter, let's say 3, you can see this governs particles 11 through 16. And now if I want to recolor this chunk, whatever it may happen to be, what I will do is I will select one of these particles, and then down here you see influence on child color. I'm going to change this to always, and I'm going to repeat this for each particle like so. And I will do this as quickly as I can. And one more. And there we go. Now I can hit update, and I again want to go to this animations tab, and I'm going to choose my color. So we will click here, and I'm going to make this one red again. So we will do red, and I can say update. And now if I spawn this on the target, okay, so that was those swords around the major sword in the middle. And that brings up a good point. While we have this spawn button to see the entire spell effect, there is no magic button, so to speak, to let you see an individual particle. So, you know, if I go to particle 4, there's no button here that I can click to just say show me particle 4. However, emitters can kind of let you do that. So if I go back here and I go back to the create particles, what I'm going to do is go all the way down here to override life, and I'm going to check that box, and then I'm going to change the life value to something really, really high, like 1,000. So as you can imagine, life is how long the particle is on the screen for. So by doing this, what we're saying is that whatever particle 16 is, it should hang around a lot longer than the rest of the VFX, or the rest of the particles, excuse me, and we will be able to tell what it is and what it looks like. So I will again hit update and then spawn on target, and some of this or something in here should stick around a lot longer. So we'll spawn, and yep, here we go. So we have these red sort of auras that would have been surrounding the swords to give them a bit of extra glow. So that's a good way to figure out, you know, which particle is which. And I should have displayed this. I meant to, because I was talking about what makes a spell difficult versus what makes one easy. And the reason Blade of Valor is difficult is because if I go back to particles here, whereas Fast Blade only had 4 particles, Blade of Valor has all the way down to 46 different particles, and that is only for one of 3 different VFX. So this one is a lot more tedious and will take a lot more time to recolor exactly the way you want. But the process is the same, you know, unless you do want to do these broad sweeping changes. So those are the 2 main ways to make large changes to a spell at once. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say file new, so I don't have to reset those values manually, because I just changed several things. So I will just go ahead and load back in Blade of Valor VFX2 real quick here, like that, and we can move on. Now, we'll get into the particles and the textures here. Those are very closely tied together. So we're going to kind of talk about them at the same time. Now, I've already sort of showed you the basics of recoloring a particle. You're going to select it, you're going to go to animation, color, and then you can change the color. However, particles also have different types. You can see that this one is labeled light model. And then if we go down here, we have disk. And then if we keep going, we have model and laser and powder. And there are other types as well. If I expand this list here, you can see there are a bunch of different ones. And they all sort of have different properties. So if I go to light model, and then I go to the data tab, you can see there's not much here. Okay, there's a parameters, and it tells me it uses model 0, which if I go to models and look at model 0, okay, it's just a ring. That doesn't tell me much. It kind of just tells me the shape of that particle. However, if I were to go to, let's say, disk, you can see now on the data tab, there's more to manipulate. And in particular, we have color edge inner and color edge outer. So those can affect the way that your particle looks. So if we go to the base color, you can see it's this range of sort of beiges. But if we go back to data and let's say color edge inner, well, this happens to be white, so that means it's not going to have any effect on the base color. But if I were to change it to red, then it should, or it will somewhere. I have no idea what particle 2 is. We might not be able to see what this actually does, but we can try. Okay, I didn't really see any red there. We can look at the textures to see. So this is texture 16, which looks like, okay, so it affects part of the blade, but the blade already has some color to it, so that's probably why we didn't see much of a change. So let's try that again. We will go to data, and this time we'll also change the outer. And what do we do this? We made that red. So we'll make this red as well. Go like that. And we'll say update. And now we will look at the blades and we'll see if we can notice a difference on the inner or the outer sides of them. So update. This is not wanting to click. There we go. Now my character blinked, and this will have updated. And on target. And yeah, okay. Yep, on the edges of that large blade, there was some extra color. So let's do that again. Right here. It's very, very subtle, but there is some change going on there. So that's one of the particles to keep in mind is disk, because it can affect the color in different ways. Another one like that is model. So if I look at model here, you can see it has a color begin and a color end. So this is sort of like the color gradient that we had in that first spell I showed. And, again, just I can add a node simply by right-clicking. So it's kind of going to work like this, where it's going to start with a color and then end with a different color. But instead of it just being these flat colors, they're kind of going to mix together. So you may have this gradient the way you want, but then it's going to look funky. So you might want to go to the data tab and check to see if these colors are different. And in this case, they are. This one has, a bit of a darker, like a gray to it. And, this one starts off as, a really light yellow. So that, if you wanted your spell to be blue or something, then that may affect it. And you might want to change those values down to white, because again, white has 0 influence, and then it will the particle will only look like the color that you set it to. Now, one special case that I want to bring up is powder. So let's find a powder particle here. All right, here, particle 15 is powder. Now, most of the changes were happening on the data tab. However, if I go to data on particle, you can see that there's nothing that talks about color. So if I go to animation, and I'm going to kind of skip ahead here real quick, but let's change this color to, let's say, like a blue, like that. I can kind of look at the texture of what this will look like, again, by going to this textures tab, and I'm going to say texture color 1, and so this uses texture 17. And I can look and I can see which texture 17 is. Okay, it's these sort of flakes or sparks or something. And now what we can do is we can kind of look at the spell and look for those. So if I hit update here and then I spawn this on the target, okay, there we go. Those were blue little flecks right there as the blade sort of shattered and disappeared. So if we do this again, let's say spawn on target. Okay, here's our blue things, but right at the end there, they fade into yellow. And the reason that that's happening, even though there's nothing in this data area, has to do with this right here, simple animation. And so you can see here, you can set the different frames. So frame 0, 5, 15, 24, it starts at the color that we set, but then at the end, it changes into a bit of orange. So if I were to change these to white, it should stay that blue color the whole way through. So let's go down to color, and I'm just going to make it a bit darker so we can see this a little bit easier. And I'll make this like that. And now I will hit update and spawn on target. And we can see here our particles stay nice and blue over there. So that's exactly what we may want in this case. Powder was a very vexing one for me for a while because I was used to looking for color changes in the data tab and I was unaware of this simple animation. So I did want to mention this one specifically. Now on to textures. So textures give particles sort of their basic look, their basic, it's hard to say shape because a model really gives it its shape, but they give it its basic look. So we can see, okay, that's kind of a bright thing. This is, some dashes back and forth. This is going to be a line. And actually that brings up the bug that I wanted to talk about that is guaranteed to cause a crash. And it has to do with textures. Any texture that has a width of less than 128, if you try and edit it and re-import it, it will crash the game. And so what you can do is when you go and you re-edit this, you can simply change the size from 64 to 128. So let's see if we can figure out which part of the spell that this particle is affecting. So we can say, okay, this is particle 38. And if we really want, again, we can go back to emitters and we can try and find particle 38. So there's particle 10. Okay, that goes to 35. Maybe the next one will give us 38. Yep, sure enough. Okay, so here's 38. And we can say override life. And we will change this to a really high value. And we will say update. And now spawn on target. And did I not? No, I thought I hit update. Did it not go? Oh, there we go. Here it is. Here's a ring that is sticking around for a long time and then actually fades color a little bit. So if we go to particle 38, we can look into why that is. So here's particle 38, and it is a model particle. So, okay, the base color, yeah, that makes sense. It did start out as kind of a reddish color, and then it faded into a blue. But let's see if it has any other data to it. The color begin and the color end. No, those are both white, so that's being solely controlled by, well, I shouldn't say solely, but it's being controlled by mainly this, base animation color. But the other thing we want to check is actually the texture. So if we go here and say texture color 1, we can see that this is, affected by texture 7 like we knew, but none of these other options are checked. So specifically color to alpha. So what color to alpha will do is essentially change this color to black and white, and then use those values to determine the opacity of the skill, with black being completely transparent and white being completely opaque. So we can try that and we can see if it makes any changes or what those changes look like. We'll say spawn on target here, and this is going to take a while to start rendering in, but here we go. And it's looking mostly the same. It's a little whiter than it was before. It's not quite, yeah, this is definitely lighter than it was, especially in these highlights area. So, although that's not really alpha, let's see here. If we uncheck this, see, this is kind of what I want the video to be. I want it to be organic. I want to really showcase how this process works. And it is really, a process of trial and error. You're just going to have to play with settings and figure them out. And like this, I don't know how everything works, and I'm just going to have to play around a little bit. So I'm going to turn that color to alpha back off, and I will make sure that my character blinks there with update. Okay, spawn on target. And now we'll see if it looks any less opaque. Not really. It doesn't look like it's changing a whole lot. I guess it is thinner, or it seems thinner to me. So it seems a bit different. But maybe not a ton. Now, we also don't have just a single texture, or we may have additionals. If I go to texture 2 here, okay, well, that's blank. It's not being affected by anything, but we have normal, reflection, distortion. Okay, so this one does have a distortion texture. So let's see, distortion. Particle 8 is this kind of fiery effect. But as you see, that this one is set to, this doesn't have alpha. These just affect the UV. So let's see here. If I uncheck this, and actually we'll just disable the whole thing, and I say update and spawn on target, we'll see what change that makes. So now this is basically just a flat ring, because we took away that distortion that made it that sort of fiery kind of, inconsistent texture. So if we enable this again and we say update and spawn on target, then we should get back that sort of inconsistent and different texture. So again, that's one of the ways that these things work together to really change the way particles look. And you're just going to have to play around like I did to figure out what and why those changes are being made. So another thing that we can do here is we can actually edit those textures. So I'm going to disable these real quick just to make the outcome easier to see. And then instead of this textures tab, I'm going to go up to the main textures tab, and I am going to export this. Now, this, again, this is the bug. So any spell with a width of less than 128 will cause a crash to the game. And so what I can do is when I export this, I will export this. I have a textures folder here, and I will call this, let's say, light, I don't know, light bar, something. We will say OK. And now I can load this into Photoshop. So we will open that up like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set the saturation of this to 0. So there we go. Now it is just black and white. So this means that the color that texture is now going to have no effect on the actual color of the skill or the base color. And that's the only thing that's going to come through. So but what I need to do now is I need to change the width of this. And so in Photoshop anyway, I can hit Control-Alt-C for the canvas size, and I am going to change the width here to 128 like that. And I'm just going to leave this alone. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter that there's some space on the side. If I go back to the game here, you will see this is DXT1 format, or basically just flat RGB, which means that it's using black as the opacity, and black is 0 opacity. It's transparent. So if I go back into Photoshop, the fact that there's some extra black on the sides here really doesn't matter because that's transparent. So I can save this real quick. Again, I want to make sure I'm saving it as DXT1. So I will hit OK. And now, if I go back to the game, I can hit Replace, and I can go to Light Bar and say OK. And there we go. I didn't crash. And that is because I set this to 128. Now, again, this only applies to the width. If I had a spell that was, let's say, like 8 pixels tall, but, 128 wide, that would be fine. That wouldn't crash me. And this just, I've talked to Ocelot about it. He is aware of it. It has to do with the converter that he's using to take these images out of the game and bring them into the plugin. So hopefully it will be resolved soon. But again, if you're going to mess with textures, please save before you do that, because you do not want to crash and lose progress. So now let's see what change that had. And we're going to go back to our particles here, and we're going to go to animation. And okay, so this was blue, but we're just going to make the whole thing blue. And we should be able to tell now that it should just be solid blue the whole way. There should be no other influence from any other color. So we will update this and we will say spawn on target. And sure enough, it is blue the whole way, which is exactly what we would expect from this. Now, as you can see, it's still kind of strange looking, and that is likely due to our, oh, and it didn't stay blue the whole way. So let's go ahead and look. If we go to our secondary texture here, oh, it's set to none. So why is that? Well, okay, it was distortion. That was the one we were using. So texture 8 is, that fire. So the blue mixed with this sort of fire is causing that different color. So it did change almost into sort of a green, which of course blue and yellow make green. So one thing I can do here is I could either export this and turn it black and white, or another thing I can try is no, actually this won't work with the distortion. So the texture colors have this color to alpha, but as you can see, distortion does not. So I can't change it that way. But if I go back to textures, it actually happens that I have this saved from another spell. So that was texture 8, right? Yes? Okay. So I will replace this, and I have fire here, and I will select that. Now, if I update this and we go back to our particles, this now should stay blue the whole way. So we'll say spawn on target, and okay, it looks like it's staying blue. This is where it started to turn that sort of green as the orangish yellow mixed in. So we have done it now. This is staying blue. Nope, it changed again. Wow, that is really interesting, and I do not know why that is. And again, I don't have all the answers to this, and it just takes playing around to figure out what is causing this. Okay, so this is a model texture. So let's see here. If we go to data and we look at begin and end, nope, those are both white. So what is causing this? There is no scale of any other color, and the alpha stays the same. So let's see here. If we go to animation and then the textures again, let's just go ahead and disable this altogether, and we will hit update. And now if we spawn this on the target, actually I'm getting really sick of that being so slow, so I'm going to change this down to like, oops, no, not up to 10,000, down to 100. So we will update that. Okay, yeah, my character blinked. Now spawn on target. It's still changing to like a greenish color. That is really bizarre. And again, this is part of the process. I am actually at this point a little bit stumped because I don't feel like it should do that. I wonder if something else is using that texture. I don't think so. I think this was the only spell that was using that texture. So let's go here, and yeah, now because we removed that, there's nothing using texture 8. So if we go to texture 7, okay, only particle 38 is using texture 7, which is the one we're editing. This is really strange here. So texture 1, texture 2 is disabled. So let's try making this color to alpha. So we will say update here, and we will say spawn on target. There we go. Now it stayed blue the whole way. However, there are still some other options that we could have checked. And if we come down here, we see this calculate color. And if you're familiar at all with Photoshop or other image manipulation programs, you will recognize this kind of thing. We have add, we have multiply, we have subtract. So these are kind of blend modes that you would see for layers in other image manipulation software. And then not only do we have that here for the texture, but if I go to the parameters, then you will see that we also have it here. So here we go, draw mode. This is set to add. I could change this to multiply or blend or subtract, things like that. And then this will affect the color too. So we will go to update and spawn, and we'll see if that made any change to it. Yep. So it got a little bit brighter at the end there. And for just demonstration's sake, we will go to textures and we will change this from add to multiply, and we will say update and spawn on target. And that doesn't look like it did a whole lot. We can say minimum and try this and see what it does. Again, doesn't look like it did a whole lot, and that's probably because we set this color to alpha, so it's only really using that color, and then the rest is just being used for opacity. So let's one last time try this. Okay, that made a big difference. So now we had that black to it, and it also turned back to green. So I'm being a broken record here, but it just takes fiddling around to see what's going to change what and what's going to give you the outcome that you want. All right, so that covers particles and textures for the most part. The last sort of thing that we have here is models. Now, whereas the texture kind of controls the overall look of a particle, the model determines like the shape in which it moves. So let's see here. One of these is well, that one's just a flat ring. That one's kind of a weird part of an orb, but it has kind of a flat piece to it. One of these is a large spiral. I think it's, here we go. This is what I'm looking for. So this big spiral here. And now if, let's say, we spawn on target our spell, we can see, well, that was hard to tell, but let's try that again. Spawn on target. Yeah, that's really hard to see with the way we have that changed. So let's go back to particle 38. Actually, we're going to change the, I'm just going to say file new. How about that? We'll just try this again. So VFX2, update. And now if we spawn this on the target, you can see there we go. We have these spirals at the end there. So that is likely going to be controlled by the model. So what we can do is we can go to the model and we can see, okay, this is being used by particles 40 and 41. So if we go and look at those particles, we can see, okay, here's 40, and it has a color of sort of an orange. or a golden color, and let's see, 41 has a color of kind of a, oops, I just right clicked on accident. Let's say fit to contents, and we will delete that. So this one has a light blue to it, and they are both models. So we will check the data for a beginning and an end. That one is white, and then we go back to particle 40, and we will see here beginning and end. No, again, those are both white. So that's what's giving us our color again. So if we say update spawn on target, we have some blue and we have some sort of yellowish swirls. So now if we go to models, we can export this and we can change the color of this, but we have to do so in Penumbra or another 3D manipulation type software. So I'm going to say export, and I'm going to choose GLTF. And then I have a particle models folder here. And well, I already have some things saved here, but we'll just say spiral 2, and we will say OK. And now I will open up Penumbra, and we will import that file. So file, import, GLTF, and we are going to choose spiral 2. And now this looks solid here, but that's because of the shading mode that we're in. So we are going to change this from solid shading over to this next one, which is material shading. And now you can see that it's kind of clear. And that's the way that it should be. And this is kind of beyond the video, but it has to do with the UV. So you can see that the UV is set to this sort of clear, and only about a quarter of this is actually touching it. So that's why we're getting some transparency within there. And that's actually how these work most of the time, or if not all the time. That's the only way I've seen models. So let's go back to layout. Now, if we want to change the color of this, what we need to do is we need to go down to this green triangle here, this data properties, and we are going to change this color attribute. So we're going to delete this one that exists right now by hitting the minus sign. And now you can see that turned black. And we are going to add a new one by hitting the plus sign. And we need to name this capital color. So COLOR, and then underscore 0. Now, what we want is we want to make sure that face corner is selected and byte color is selected. And then we'll change our color here to, let's say, so we had blue and yellow, so we'll do like pink, like that. And if we hit OK, well, nothing really changed. That's because we need to go to the shading tab and we need to change one of the nodes. So we'll go here to shading, and you see we have a couple of nodes here, but one of them is this color attribute, which is what we just changed. And you can see here that this is looking for that original one, that COL, and it's red, meaning it basically no longer exists. So we are going to now select our color 0, and you can see here that this changed into the kind of pink, this bright color that we gave it. So now we can go ahead and export this, and we are going to say File, Export, GLTF, and we will, instead of red spiral, we will call this pink spiral. And now when you export, you want to make sure that the format is on GLTF embedded. And then you want to go down to this geometry section and then mesh. And you want to make sure that these 4 boxes are checked. You want UVs, normals, tangents, and vertex colors. So once those 5 things are set, you're good to go. You can export this, and we can go back to the game. And now we can hit replace, and we will say pink spiral like that. And now if I hit update and I spawn this on the target, there we go. We have, so it's been sort of mixed in. You know, we had blue as one of the colors. So again, if I do this, you can see that it's actually kind of a purple, whereas the one that was yellow is more of a pink. So that's really kind of the last thing that affects the colors of a given particle is the model. So really we have covered the basics here, and I have tried to go over as many of the possible issues that you may run into by showing you the different ways that the colors can work together and conflict with each other. So I'm going to call this video done for now. I apologize for sort of the rambling nature of it, but again, I wanted it to be sort of organic. I wanted to really showcase the process of what recoloring VFX is like. So if this was unappealing to you, then I do apologize for that. Now, lastly, before we wrap things up, what I want to mention is that if you did change a texture like we did, so we changed, which was it? I thought we changed 7. Was it not 7? Anyway, if you did change a texture, what you need to do is you need to include that in your penumbra. So let's just do this again. We'll do, where did the fire go? There we go. So if I replace this, and I'm going to go to textures, and I will say fire. So if I change this, and I'm going to export this to a penumbra add-on, I need to include this file. So when you make your add-on, you want to, export this file, and then sort of like you would when you import a tattoo, you want to assign that file this path. Now, if that's a bit over your head and you don't know or understand how to do that, that's fine. Don't worry about it. We're gonna export this as a text tools mod. So this is the way that I do things always. I don't bother with penumbra add-ons. I would rather just make a text tools add-on or mod pack and then load it in penumbra that way. But I did want to mention for the people who do use penumbra that that's something that they need to include. So now what we can do is we can say export, and yeah, we'll just name this Blade of Valor. I have a VFX folder here, and I will just go ahead and save that. And then, we would load it into penumbra, and we would have our edited spell. So again, that's really it. I hope that this was helpful, even though it was sort of long and rambly. If you have questions, please answer or ask them in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. However, it is a bit difficult to do so, considering this has to do with colors and textures and things like that. So if you want, I would encourage you to join my Discord. I just started one recently. And then you can do things like link these textures or take screenshots and show your settings. And then you also don't just have me to answer. There may be some other people there that can help you out as well. So I will link the Discord in the description. And with that all covered, that will do it for now. So hopefully you can play around with these and recolor your spells and allow you to have some more fun within the game.